Quick favor before we start. If you're new here and you like workplace drama with satisfying endings, hit subscribe and the bell so you don't miss the next one. Trust me, this story is worth it. Let's go. Be me. Name is Emmitt. 42 years old, senior manufacturing engineer at Fortis Industries. Standing on the production floor looking at $340,000 worth of wrong parts. 40 crates of components we can't use. Because someone ordered insertion-receiving interface components. When what we needed was male-female connectors. Same thing, different words. Except one is precise, and everyone understands it. The other is approved corporate language. That apparently means something different to procurement than it does to engineering. Larkin is next to me, rubbing his temples. This is the third wrong shipment this month. Third time our specs got lost in translation. Third time we halted production waiting for parts that someone ordered wrong. Because they couldn't use the right words. I've been doing this job for 18 years. Never seen anything like this. We used to speak the same language. Engineering, logistics, sales, procurement. Everyone understood the terminology. Because the terminology was precise. Designed over decades to mean exactly one thing. Zero confusion. Zero guesswork. Then Margot decided our language was problematic and replaced precision with feelings. Now we're drowning in wrong parts and missed deadlines. Because nobody knows what anyone means anymore. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how we got here. How a manufacturing company with 60 years of history nearly collapsed in 4 months. Because someone banned the words we needed to do our jobs. I joined Fortis Industries straight out of engineering school. 22 years old, junior manufacturing engineer. The old-timers taught me everything. Not just the technical skills, but the language. Every industry has its vocabulary. Precise terms that mean exactly what they say. No room for interpretation. Nothing confusing. In manufacturing, this matters more than most. A tolerance of 0.005 inches versus 0.05 inches is the difference between a part that works and a part that destroys the machine. A male connector versus a female connector is the difference between components that fit and components that sit in a crate useless. We developed this language over generations, not to exclude people, but to include precision, so that an engineer in one department could communicate exactly with someone in another, without ambiguity destroying the message. I learned the vocabulary like a second language. Male-female connectors, plug and socket. Master-slave architecture for control systems. Kill switches for emergency shutoffs. Drill down into specifications. Leverage resources across departments. Grandfather existing configurations. Blacklist defective suppliers. Every term had a specific meaning. Everyone who needed to know, knew. That's how we built things that worked. For 60 years without major communication failures. Fortis Industries made industrial equipment, conveyor systems, packaging machinery, automation components. Sold to factories worldwide. 400 employees across engineering, manufacturing, logistics, sales. About $120 million in annual revenue. Good company, solid reputation. Known for quality and reliability. Because we communicated precisely and built exactly what clients needed. Then Margot arrived. New operations supervisor, 39 years old. Came from a consulting background. Never worked in manufacturing before, but had lots of ideas about workplace culture. First month she observed and took notes. Sat in on meetings across departments. Listened to how we communicated. Asked questions about our terminology. Why do you call it a male connector? Why is the control system called master-slave? Why do you say kill the power instead of turn off? Why does everything sound so aggressive and gendered? I tried to explain. These terms are industry standard. Used worldwide for decades. Everyone understands exactly what they mean. That's why we use them. She nodded but looked unconvinced. said she'd be reviewing our communication practices, identifying opportunities for more inclusive language. I didn't think much of it. Figured maybe she'd change some HR documents. Use they instead of he in the handbook. Standard corporate stuff. I was wrong. Month 2, she presented her findings. Called it the Inclusive Communication Initiative. The presentation was alarming. She'd identified problematic language patterns throughout our operational vocabulary, terms that were gendered, aggressive, or exclusionary, creating barriers to a welcoming workplace, making some employees uncomfortable, particularly women and non-binary staff. She showed examples. Male-female connectors reinforced gender binaries. Master-slave architecture evoked historical trauma. Kill switches normalized violence. Terms like drill down and leverage were aggressive masculine-coded language. Blacklist and whitelist had racial connotations. Grandfathered implied patriarchal inheritance. Even manpower was problematic. Her recommendation was comprehensive. Immediate transition to approved inclusive terminology. Mandatory for all internal and external communication. Training sessions for all staff. Compliance monitored by her office. She distributed a glossary. Old terms crossed out. New terms listed beside them. I looked through it with growing horror. Male connector became component A, or insertion interface. Female connector became component B, or receiving interface. Master-slave became primary-secondary, or leader-follower. Kill switch became cessation mechanism, or emergency pause. Drill down became explore deeper. Leverage became utilized collaboratively. Blacklist became exclusion registry. Whitelist became approved registry. Grandfather became legacy exempt. Manpower became team capacity. I raised my hand, asked how this would work in technical specifications, where precision was critical, where ambiguity could cause major errors. Margot smiled patiently, said she understood the concern, but language could be precise and inclusive. We just needed to adapt. The terms she'd chosen were clear enough. Anyone could understand them with context. Larkin spoke up. These new terms aren't industry standard. Our suppliers won't know what we mean. Our clients won't understand our specs. We'll be speaking a different language than everyone else. Margot said we could be leaders, showing the industry a better way. Change had to start somewhere. Larkin looked at me. The same expression I had. This was going to be a disaster. But Cormac, the plant manager, was on board. Said we needed to evolve with the times. Support Margot's initiative. Give it a fair chance. Implementation started the next week. Training sessions for all staff. How to use the new terminology. Practice exercises in rephrasing. Tests on the approved vocabulary. I sat through 4 hours of learning. To call a male connector an insertion interface, and a female connector a receiving interface. Terms that sounded vaguely obscene, and didn't communicate anything useful. First week under the new policy. I had to write specs for a new conveyor system. Normally straightforward. List the components, describe the connections, specify tolerances. Now I had to translate everything into approved inclusive language. What used to take an hour took 4. Because I had to consult the glossary constantly. Figure out the approved way to say everything. Then double-check that it still made technical sense. Sent the specs to Procurement. They sent back questions. What's an insertion-receiving interface assembly? Do you mean the plug connections? I couldn't say plug connections. That wasn't on the approved list. Said yes, the component A to component B assembly. More questions. Which component is A and which is B? The diagram shows both looking similar, because the labels didn't convey any information. Male and female were instantly clear. A and B required explanation every time. First major error happened week 2. Logistics ordered parts based on my specs. I'd written insertion interface components, 200 units. They ordered what they thought that meant. got 200 units of the wrong connector type, because insertion interface could mean either end, depending on your interpretation. Male-female would have been unambiguous. Cost us $40,000 and a week of delays. Margot said it was a transition issue. We get better at the new terminology. I said the new terminology was the problem. It didn't communicate clearly. She said I needed to be more precise in my descriptions. I said precision was what the old terms provided. Meeting ended with nothing resolved. Week 3, the cross-department failure started. Engineering sent specs to manufacturing. Manufacturing interpreted them differently. Built components that didn't match engineering's intent, because the language was too vague. Sales sent quotes to clients, using approved terminology. Clients called confused. What's a cessation mechanism? They meant kill switch. Sales couldn't say kill switch. Had to explain around it. Clients got frustrated. Thought we didn't understand our own products. Sutter from logistics came to find me, face red with frustration. What the hell is a primary-secondary control assembly? Is that the master-slave setup or something else? I said yes, it's the master-slave. He said, then why can't you just say that? I said, because it's banned. He said, this is insane. I said, yes, it is. We stood there agreeing it was insane. But neither of us could fix it. Month 2 production started suffering. Wrong parts ordered consistently. Specs misunderstood across departments. Drawings labeled with terms nobody recognized. New hires especially confused. They'd learned industry standard terminology in school. Arrived to find Fortis spoke a different language. Had to unlearn everything. Then learn the approved alternatives, which weren't used anywhere else. One new engineer quit after 3 weeks. Said he couldn't work in an environment where basic technical terms were forbidden. He'd go somewhere that let him speak like an engineer. We lost 2 more that month. Both cited communication frustration. Couldn't do their jobs effectively. When they couldn't use effective language, client Thornbury called with a major problem. Their conveyor system had failed. Needed replacement parts immediately. Waverly from sales took the call. Tried to document the issue. But Thornbury used normal industry terms. And Waverly couldn't use them in the ticket. Translated everything to approved language. The ticket reached engineering garbled. We couldn't figure out what actually failed. Called Thornbury back for clarification. They got frustrated repeating themselves. Used terms we couldn't acknowledge. The call took 3 hours. What should have been a simple parts order became an international incident of miscommunication. Thornbury got their parts eventually, but late. Their production line was down for 2 extra days. Cost them $180,000 in losses. They called Hargrove, our CEO, directly. Said if we couldn't communicate like professionals, they'd find a supplier who could. Month 3, the supply chain collapsed. Procurement couldn't order correctly anymore. Specs were too vague, interpretations varied. Suppliers were confused by our terminology. Sent wrong parts regularly. We had a warehouse full of mistakes. Components we couldn't use. Components we couldn't return. Because our order forms were technically correct. Just incomprehensible. Production quotas fell 40%. Because we were always waiting for the right parts to arrive. After the wrong parts had been sent back, engineering backlog grew exponentially. Every project took 3 times longer, because every communication required translation, and every translation introduced errors, and every error required correction, which required more communication, which introduced more errors. I started keeping 2 sets of documents, the official ones in approved language, for Margot's compliance reviews, and unofficial ones in real terminology, for actually getting work done. Others did the same. We had a shadow communication system, using industry standard terms, hidden from management, just so we could function. Month 4, Margot discovered the shadow system, found engineering documents using banned terminology, called an emergency meeting, said this was unacceptable. Defiance of company policy, creating a hostile environment for those who supported inclusion. She wanted disciplinary action, formal warnings for everyone involved. I stood up, said the shadow system exists because the official one doesn't work. We can't build machinery with vague language. We can't order parts with ambiguous terms. We can't communicate with clients who use industry standard vocabulary. Your policy is destroying our ability to function. Margot said that was resistance to change. Exactly the kind of attitude the policy was meant to address. I said no, it's resistance to dysfunction. We're engineers. We need precise language. That's not oppression, that's physics. Components fit or they don't. Specifications are met or they're not. Ambiguity kills in manufacturing. Sometimes literally. Cormac finally intervened, said we needed to review the policy's impact. Look at the numbers objectively. Margot protested that we needed to give it more time. Cormac said we didn't have more time. Production was down 40%. 3 major clients were threatening to leave. Engineering staff turnover was at an all-time high. Something had to change. The review was devastating. $6.2 million in losses directly attributable to communication failures. Wrong orders, wrong parts, wrong specifications. All traced back to ambiguous approved terminology. Client satisfaction scores had collapsed. Thornbury had already left. 2 others were finalizing departures. Employee surveys showed massive frustration. Top complaint was inability to communicate effectively. The data was undeniable. Margot's policy was destroying the company. Hargrove called an executive meeting. I was invited to present the engineering perspective. Showed specific examples. The wrong part sitting in our warehouse. The specs that got misinterpreted. The client calls that went sideways. All because we couldn't use words that worked. Margot defended her initiative. Said we hadn't given it enough time. Said resistance from old guard employees was sabotaging success. Said the shadow communication system proved people weren't really trying. Hargrove asked her directly, what's more important, inclusive language or functioning operations? She hesitated. Said they should be compatible. He said they weren't proving compatible. At what point do we prioritize the business? She didn't have an answer. The policy was suspended that day, pending full review, which meant it was dead. Immediate return to industry standard terminology. In all documentation and communication. The relief on the factory floor was visible. People actually cheered when they heard. First time I'd heard cheering at work in months. Margot was reassigned. Moved to a role without operational authority. Training and development, ironic choice. Maybe she'd learn something. Recovery took 3 months. Rebuilding supplier relationships. Convincing clients we could communicate again. Clearing the backlog of delayed projects. Hiring new engineers to replace those who'd quit. We lost good people permanently. People who couldn't wait for the policy to die. Who found jobs at companies that let them speak normally. Their expertise walked out the door. Some we never replaced. Larkin and I worked 80-hour weeks. Fixing the documentation. Translating everything back to real terminology. Training new hires on actual industry language. The stuff they should have learned on day 1. Year later we'd stabilized. Production back to normal. Clients who'd stayed were satisfied again. New clients replacing some we'd lost. Revenue recovering slowly. The scars remained. 3 major clients gone forever. 20 employees who'd quit or been pushed out. A year of growth lost to communication dysfunction. All because someone thought male-female connectors were oppression. I think about Margot's logic sometimes. Trying to understand her perspective. She saw gendered terms and felt excluded. Saw aggressive language and felt uncomfortable. Wanted to create a workplace where everyone felt welcome. Not malicious, probably well-intentioned, but catastrophically wrong about something fundamental. Language in manufacturing isn't about feelings. It's about function. Terms exist because they work. They evolved over decades of use, refined until they meant exactly one thing. To everyone who needed to understand, you can't replace that with invented alternatives and expect the same precision. The new terms didn't carry the same information density, didn't have the same universal recognition, didn't connect to the same mental models. They were just words. The old terms were tools, honed over generations, irreplaceable in their precision. My apprentice asked me recently about the language policy disaster. He'd heard stories, wanted to understand. I told him language is technology, just like any tool in this factory, designed for a purpose, refined through use. You don't improve a precision instrument by making it vaguely shaped. You don't improve communication by making it ambiguous. Inclusion is good. Making people feel welcome is good, but not at the cost of function. Not when lives might depend on clarity. Not when millions of dollars hang on precision. Find other ways to be inclusive. Don't destroy the tools we need to work. He nodded like he understood. Hope he never has to learn the way I did. Watching $6.2 million evaporate because someone banned the word male, and nobody could explain which connector they needed. Anyway, that's the story of how a supervisor banned professional jargon, called industry standard terms exclusionary, replaced precision with approved abstractions, and watched the entire operation collapse. Wrong parts everywhere. Specs lost in translation. Departments speaking different languages. Supply chain paralyzed. Because nobody could say what they meant. Language isn't just words. In manufacturing, it's infrastructure. The invisible system that connects everything. Lets information flow without friction. Remove that system, and everything stops. Every miscommunication becomes a wrong order. Every ambiguity becomes a delayed project. Every vague description becomes wasted money. Margot thought she was removing barriers. She was actually removing bridges. The connections that let us work together. Across departments, across companies, across borders. Now we speak normally again. Male-female connectors, master-slave systems, kill switches and drill downs. Terms that everyone understands, that have worked for 60 years, and will keep working, long after Margot's approved glossary is forgotten in some filing cabinet, where it belongs.
Precision isn't oppression.
Clarity isn't aggression. Technical language isn't patriarchy. It's just tools for building things that work. And when you ban the tools, things stop working.